Well, hello and welcome back to Midweek Mashup. Today I'm sitting down with Pastor Ty,
Woo.
and we are continuing our series called One Story.
One story. One very, very long story.
Yeah, and we hit fast forward on that story a little bit on Sunday.
Oh, just a little.
Skipping from the book of Exodus and kind of the beginning of the Old Testament to the message you gave on the prophets, which is at the end of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Kind of missed a whole section in there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, multiple sections. We're just kind of flown by and said, go check it out if you want.
Yeah, so no wisdom literature, no kings, just straight to the prophets.
Just straight to the prophets.
To be fair, there's a lot of things to get through in the Bible. And so if we want to keep this series like less than 2 months,
basically,
then we do have to skip some important stuff. But that's why we have time like the Midweek Mashup
Yeah.
to sit down. So I do want to jump a little bit more into your message on the prophets a little bit, which I really enjoyed, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
I did want to ask, like, who are these prophets and why should we be listening to them? Because as far as I know, these are kind of like fringe society dudes that are just like kind of really out there sometimes.
Oh, more than kind of out there. Like, they are very much they're kind of viewed as outcasts in a lot of ways. And basically, like, we kind of sped through the chunk of the Old Testament because thematically the same theme appears over and over again, especially in the era of the kings, the nation of Israel, and then when it splits into the northern Israel and the southern Judah. Like, they kind of repeat this theme over and over again of people are the worst. We pull further and further away from God. Even when we have good role models who push us back toward God, we still go further away from God when given a chance. And so that happens time and time again. And then as we get into this kingdom period and this rotation of, okay, bad king after bad king after bad king. Hey, there's a decent one. Okay, back to bad kings. We get the prophets, which are these people that God has an experience with, whether it's a miracle or a calling. They have an experience with God. They have a mission stated, which the theme of each of their missions is to bring God's people back together, is to bring God's people back to himself. And so the prophets end up being these fringe people because they're the people shouting into the masses, hey, God is looking for you. God is wanting to connect with you. But the kingdom of Israel and the people of Israel, they continually just pull further and further away from him. And so these warnings really are falling on deaf ears a lot of the time. Like, they have these interactions and they try to like give their message to God's people, and then they kind of push themselves further out onto the fringes because to get noticed, they start to do some kind of weird stuff. There's a prophet who makes a little mini version of Jerusalem in the mud and then destroys it. There's dudes who live in the wilderness for years. There are some persuasive speakers and some guys who are really good at being that kind of almost debate type speakers, but a lot of them are just proclaiming, hey, Israel, we've made mistakes. We've messed up. We got to return. God will forgive us if we just turn back around. And then nothing happens. And so then we get to the prophets in our Bible today because Israel didn't heed the warnings. They go into exile, and the scribes in exile are trying to study. They're looking back and they're finding all these writings. They're looking back at all these proclamations and going, "Oh, these guys were right. Oh no, we did not listen. We should write this down and make sure this is compiled so that other people listen." And that's how they get out, and that's how they get into our Old Testament. And something that I didn't have a ton of time to talk about on Sunday was we put these at the end of the Old Testament because our Old Testament is categorized thematically. So like I talked about on Sunday, like we have all of the history literature kind of put back to back with First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles. Like those they're all kind of compiled together, but in the Hebrew scriptures, First and Second Chronicles actually end up at the end of the story because it's written by these scribes, the same scribes who compile the prophets, the same group of people that look back and compile the prophets, then they tell the whole story of God's people. First and Second Chronicles is really, it's a summary. It's a summary point to go, okay, this is what has happened through the nation of Israel. Here's why this matters. Here's what needs to happen. And First and Second Chronicles ends really on a sour kind of low note because that's where the people of Israel are. That can be kind of confusing for first-time readers of the Bible because you get to Malachi, or like I said on Sunday, I called him Malachi growing up, the Malachi the prophet. You get to Malachi, and there's this prophetic vision of what is to come, the coming king, the coming shepherd, and it almost feels like not triumphant, but hopeful. And the message of the prophets is hopeful in some ways because exile is not the end. There is restoration still coming. But really, Chronicles should be what we look at last in the Old Testament because it's this hindsight view of the nation of Israel as they realize their mistake again and finally go, all right, something has got to change. Like, we called out to God and he saved us from Egypt and then we deserted him. And then he gave us commandments and we worshiped him and then we deserted him. And then he gave us the promised land and we worshiped him and we deserted him. And then he wanted us to be under him as a nation of Israel. He wanted us to treat him like the king. And we looked around and saw, well, they all have human kings. We want a human king. And then we got the human king and we deserted him. And it just happens over and over and over again. And the Chronicles like end on this sour note because the scribes are looking back and going, oh, this is what we do. This is our pattern. Yeah. Like it's easy to see our pattern now as we've done this over and over and over again. And that's where the prophets, that's kind of why we skipped over like a lot of the Old Testament because that's the theme. And the prophets are looking back and going, all right, well, what do we need to learn from these guys? What do we need to learn from the prophets going forward? And so like I highlighted Amos and Ezekiel and Isaiah a little bit just to give kind of a taste of what reading the prophets is like because it's not prophecy like we think of it in pop culture today. Like if you were to give an AI generator the word prophet, they might generate something like a crystal ball or like someone in a dark room foreseeing the future. Like that's not what prophets are in the Bible. They're not meant to be these fortune tellers of what is to come and things you should avoid. No, they're looking at what is and what has been, and they're calling people back to what should be. And they use a lot of like symbolic language and cosmic imagery to tell those lessons and tell those stories, but they're also just trying to get people back on track. And that's where we have the prophets. And that's why like I love that Josh, our technical specialist, let me quote him on Sunday because some of the stuff that we look at with the prophets, Josh referenced Martin Luther King Jr. as someone in our modern context who we could kind of like sort of be a simile of this is what a prophet sort of feels like. Like this is a person who was looking around, seeing injustice, seeing the wrong in the world, and calling it out. And like that, he's continuing the prophetic tradition. And that's where we come into as the church, is we continue on the prophetic tradition. There are, we use a gift test here on the staff for FCC called the APEST, and each of those letters stands for a gift, and the P is prophet. And we have people in our church who have the gift of prophecy. They don't tell the future. They don't like read our fortunes and tell us what's coming. If they do and they're hiding out on us, come on, man. But no, I'm just kidding. But they are the ones who look around and see, oh, this is what has happened, or this is what's going on, or this is what we do, and here's what God could mean for us based on that.
Yeah.
Or here's the books of prophecy that we have, and this is what we can learn from those today. Like, I focus on Amos and his issues with the religious festivals of Israel back in the day. Well, our equivalent for that in modern times is Sunday morning. It's not necessarily a festival, but it's the time when God's people gather together to celebrate, praise, offer, serve. And so if Amos is seeing a problem with the religious festivals of his day, do we need to listen to that prophecy? Do we need to look around and go, oh, do we have the same problems? Or do we have similar problems? How are we addressing them? Because if God's people have been going through this motion of, we love you, we reject you. Oh, we're sorry. Oh, we love you, we reject you, we're sorry. Are we doing the same thing? Maybe, maybe not. That's why we look at the prophets. That's why they're important. Because it helps us stay on track. Or the phrase that we use that when we talk about mission is, do we have mission drift? Like, are we slowly, we're not doing like a major sharp left turn away from God, but are we slowly kind of fading to the left? And if you fade far enough to the left, eventually you're just going to keep going. And that's where we run into problems. And so the prophets call us on that. And I highly encourage you, if the prophets are confusing, the Bible Project is a great resource. Not just, they have a video specifically on the prophets as a whole kind of category, but they also have videos on each of the books of the prophets. And so that can give you really helpful historical context, because that is important. I would say, I mean, maybe you can speak into this too. I think the prophets probably have the most important historical context in the Bible to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a direct commentary on the world around them. And so understanding that context is super crucial. And so there's some things that we can chalk up in the Bible to just like, okay, that's like a Middle Eastern way of thinking about that or something like that. But this is like, no, this is directly speaking to historical, cultural context, just like the prophets in our church. While they don't get the title of prophets, but rather we say they have the gift of prophecy. They're the people who keep us from drifting away from our mission, and they are hyper local in our context. So yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it. And prophets are kind of the people who, like, they're the first ones to smell when things start getting fishy.
Yeah.
And it's not always nice to hear that things are getting a little fishy.
Yeah.
But it's a necessary thing to keep us on track, to say like, hey, we're kind of making a turn here. Maybe we need to get back on track. And so people don't like hearing that they're wrong. So it's not surprising that they weren't very liked while they were alive. But then the scribes look back and they're like, oh man, maybe we should have listened to these guys.
Yeah, seriously. And I think it's important to also note that, like, when we look at the prophets in the Bible, and maybe even someone in our community now who has the gift of prophecy, like, it's important to know that just because someone is gifted in one of those tools, that doesn't mean that they're the only ones who can do that. Like, it's important to know that you in your own Christian life, we can look at ourselves and use the prophetic gift to say, am I on track still? And the books of the prophets are really great resources for that as well, to say, am I on track still? Is my heart still in the right place? Have I drifted a little bit in this area or another? It can be helpful if you have those people in your life to, like, kind of bounce ideas off of them or ask for their advice, but also know that, like, as a follower of Jesus, you have the Holy Spirit with you to fuel that and to give you wisdom in that way. And man, it's also so important to just pray through it and listen well. I ended my sermon on Sunday with a listening exercise, a listening prayer exercise, because so often our prayers are monologues, right? Like, God, I want to ask for this, or I want to pray for this, or I want to speak on behalf of this, or I want to praise you for this. Prayer is a dialogue. I often describe prayer as just talking with God. And if you're talking with someone, it's a conversation, right? And it's not just, I'm talking and this is my time to talk. Right. And so the prophets, like I said, they had an experience with God, and God gave them a mission or an idea or a calling. Continuing that prophetic tradition means listening. And it means listening to God. It means listening to him in prayer, listening to him through the people in your life, listening to him through scripture. And so I'd encourage people as well to just give your ears a listen, give your mouth a break. The old adage of you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Like, listen well to God, and pray that he'll soften your heart and open your ears to what he has to say to you, and continue the prophetic tradition, even if it's scary.
Thank you so much for sitting down and talking a little bit more about the sermon you gave on Sunday.
Of course.
If you'd like to hear more from Pastor Tile, go ahead and add a banner to that message. And if you're looking to explore more about what we do here at FCC, we have some more content for you right here.
Woo.